Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Canopy Cast with your hosts Christopher McGurn, John Michael Price, and Michael O'Connor. Canopy Cast is a guest-based podcast that showcases an ecosystem of expertise through thought leadership and innovation. We bring people together to provide value for our audience through impactful stories and experiences. Canopy Cast, an ecosystem of expertise. Today's episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books entrepreneurs on top podcasts. Get on-demand podcast placements scheduled for you by professionals for a flat monthly rate. Where are you in your entrepreneur journey? Validation? Launch? Traction? Scale? Wherever you are, podcasts will take you further. We ain't talking about small talk, we're talking about the good stuff. Real, actionable communication. Find out more and apply today at kitcaster.com.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Canopy Cast. This is John Michael Price. With me are my two co-hosts, Christopher McGurn and Michael O'Connor. Today we have a guest with us, Dr. Nagrath. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So Dr. Nagrath, we've been talking, you are the Chancellor at Elephant Learning Math Academy. For our audience, just to get a little background on you, if you want to, kind of explain your backstory, how you started that, and where Elephant Learning is today, that'd be great.
Sure. So Elephant Learning is a math academy for children ages 2 and up. And on average, children in our system learn about 1.5 years of math over the course of 10 weeks when they use our system just 30 minutes per week. We got started in partnership with a professor out of the University of Denver. And basically, this came from early age education research. So we've taken the activities that we kind of already know were effective because the science already said it was effective. And we combined that with advanced algorithms that quickly allow us to figure out what a child understands and does not understand. And so then we feed them those activities right at their level of understanding. And the result is accelerated learning.
That's awesome. Yeah, so how specifically, with the data that you've gotten so far, how is that affecting students, with various learning disabilities? I know some students with, I believe it's pronounced dyscalculia, where you swap numbers, much like dyslexia, or whether those students have autism or other, learning disabilities. How has that kind of cascaded through? Have you seen scalable results as well with those students, or is there a difference there?
So what we do is we teach mathematics as a language. And because of that, we've seen success from children from all backgrounds. So we've seen children with ADHD, we've seen children with autism, dyscalculia, dyslexia. All children have the capacity for developing language. And what we found is that if we can get the student to understand the ideas that are the mathematics, then the rest kind of comes along easier for them. So it's like, if you understand why you're using multiplication, then the reason for memorizing the multiplication tables is that you're using it every day.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah, I guess a quick question that I have, coming from that, specifically for our audience, we're probably not having a lot of younger kids listen to this podcast. It's mostly going to be the parents. So for those that, maybe in a situation where they're looking for this type of solution, their kids are struggling with math, what's a common problem that you see surface? It's, reoccurring that parents come to us saying, my child's having a problem learning X, Y, Z. And then what's your process, moving forward from that? To kind of give people an idea of what that would look like for them, coming to you.
That makes sense. So students in our system start out in a placement exam, and the placement exam is going to test their conceptual understanding so that we can find their initial level. And we actually send out a placement exam report, which is pretty detailed and lets you know exactly what they were working on, what they missed, and how we intend to teach it. So the way it basically works is once your student's fully placed, we basically start teaching right from there with those activities. And I think to answer your question, which is like, if a parent came to me and they're having a specific problem with their child, or if they want to understand whether their child has a problem to begin with, typically it looks like they don't understand the word problems, or they're not able to apply the math. And we get a lot of parents that are messaging us, and when like we ask what's the biggest struggle, and they say things like the child doesn't understand the basic math facts. They just don't understand. They don't get it. And so really for us, it's about finding the level of language that the student's at, because with mathematics, it kind of builds on top of itself, right? So like you learn addition. Well, repetitive addition is multiplication, right? And it's not hard for the student to catch up from a concept perspective. So we're able to get them that understanding, and then suddenly the student can participate at the grade level they are in, because they can understand the teacher and they can understand the parent. And it alleviates a lot of the anxiety. So that's the other symptom that you would see, is they maybe don't understand word problems, or they tend to be anxious around mathematics.
That's fascinating. I have a quick question kind of going along with that. I love how you describe and you teach math as a language. I think that's so powerful. And like you were saying, how children can learn languages very efficiently at like a younger age and everything. Do you find that it's similar in the way of, is it, easier to learn with immersion? You're mentioning like bringing it into daily life, those kind of normal scenarios where you can use it continually on a daily basis. I find that so fascinating. Do you think that's part of it, is that kind of immersion factor?
So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to elicit to some degree. We provide reports to the parents that are very detailed, where we tell them how we're trying to teach the ideas that we're trying to teach. And we also give them advice on how to take that outside the system. So when I built this, it was kind of more under the guise of, well, how am I going to get my child the mathematics he needs to be successful? And the way I thought about it was, well, if I could just understand his level of understanding, and if I could also then understand the game that I could play outside of the system that would get him to pick that up, then that's a win, because now I get to interact with him at his level. So I know there's not going to be the frustration of not understanding. And there's also the guidance in the tips, in the advice on what to do. So for example, if a child is learning to count, we might recommend playing a board game. And during the board game, they're going to practice counting. And one of the things that's probably going to go incorrectly is that when they're counting out the number of spaces, they're probably going to go over. They're not going to remember the number. They're not going to stop. They're just going to keep counting. And the advice says, actually let them keep counting, because you want to see how high they'll go. Maybe you'll even extend them a little bit, right? You'll say, oh, and then what comes next? 24, 25, 26, or whatever, right? And then you don't get frustrated. You don't get upset. You get them back to the beginning. And you just say, okay, so you moved it 26 spaces, but you were supposed to move it 6. So let's try again. And so and in a way, that's kind of what our system does at the same time. So the 10 minutes in the system is typically really effective. And then at any point in time, if you want to join in with your student and make it submersive, make it something outside of, the iPad, then I mean, that's even better, because then the student has to engage with you as the parent during playtime, and all of those ideas are important.
That leads into, next question I was going to ask. You mentioned the iPad. I was going to say, what's the main delivery method for your course for students? And I think you kind of alluded to that. But what I was going to say also is, do you see better results with technology? I was going to ask, there are more and more iPads being introduced into the classroom. Do you see students engaging more quickly and learning faster when it comes to tech, or outside of, traditional paper and, person-to-person interaction?
Well, so I think what it is we have to be able to give the children quality experiences. And so, there's this thing about screen time. And I mean, the government's come down and said, well, for young children, 60 minutes of screen time, right? And And I think what we're proving is that in 10 minutes of that screen time, we can deliver them just the right experiences for them to learn that much out of it. And then the question is, what do you do with the other 50 minutes of the screen time? So I think that technology helps because it becomes a portal for the student having quality experiences. The problem is that it's sort of challenging to identify and find those challenging or those experiences that would be quality.
Yeah, for sure. That's incredible. So, on your, kind of kit with Kitcaster, shout out to our episode sponsor. It says, you're passionate and you love talking about, mathematics, of course. That's pretty much a given with everything that we're already talking about. But software and SaaS as well. How have you kind of implemented that from the beginning of, starting Elephant Learning up until now, and how has that kind of developed as you've got more feedback and built the business on specifically on the software side?
Sure. So, well, I mean, I ran a software firm for about, I think, 8 years before I started this. And one of the things that I learned was that if you can minimize the amount of code, you can minimize the cost. So what we've done here with Elephant Learning is we are managing to support, iOS, Android, Amazon Kindle Fire. We are on Chrome. We're on Safari. For some reason, Firefox has some weird issue with one of the libraries we're using, so we just kind of punted that for now. But maybe we'll go back and fix it. And we were able to do that by just leveraging web technology. Though, I mean, every SaaS is different, and what they need to do and the way they need to accomplish it happens in different ways. But I mean, that's kind of been our main focus: is can we make it simpler so that it's easier to maintain, so that we don't need to have large apparatus. So like, we're trying to come in and we're bootstrapping this company, to be honest. So I mean, we couldn't have large apparatus if we wanted it.
Yeah, that actually raises a couple questions for me. I would love to learn more about like the initial inspiration. Tell us about like what got you into, like why Elephant Learning, and also like why the name Elephant. Like tell us a little bit more about the inspiration. I'm just curious. Like I'm always thinking branding and design. So like my gears are turning as soon as I saw Elephant Learning. I'd love to learn more about all of that. Like just the beginning, the inspiration there.
Well, so Elephant Head Software was named kind of very quickly. We were looking for something with 2 like words or 2 syllables or something like that. Like everything out there was kind of like that. And it was usually an animal. And I said, well, what if we call it Yellow Duck? And my client was like, no, I can't go to my board and tell them Yellow Duck's doing the software. And I said, okay, what about Elephant Head? And he said, Elephant Head. I like it. I'm doing that. So it's Elephant Head.
All right. Simple enough. I like that.
And then Elephant Learning, I mean, just kind of came from that.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So the inspiration for the whole thing kind of comes from joining an entrepreneur group called EO. And when I joined, I ended up at this Thomas Edison event in Vancouver, and a gentleman was there from Plastic Bank, and he was telling his story, which was that, he had seen on television that there's plastic out in the Pacific Ocean, the size of Texas. And he thought to himself, there's no way that's not worth money. And what he did was he devised a plan where people pick up plastic as it washes ashore in India, and they deposit it into the plastic bank. And it just so turns out that the amount they were paying him to deposit the plastic in the plastic bank was more than they were earning in the shops. So in the end, he had a measurable bottom line. He had a measurable environmental impact in the pounds of plastic they're picking up from the ocean. And they also had a measurable social impact. And what was interesting about that for me was that the game was then built so that everyone wins in a way, right? The environment wins, society wins, and the bottom line wins. And I just thought, well, that's kind of brilliant, right? Because if you can get everything to tie together in that way, then you have an organization that can exist in space and 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 even have that profit motivation drive the other good, right? So whereas typically for this type of a problem, we would look to government, which, I mean, every day seems to become more inept, to try to solve this problem. And God, they do it completely inefficiently, and it becomes a question of, should our tax dollars pay for this? And here you have a situation where not only is the person doing it getting the value out from what he's putting in, as it benefits the earth and as it benefits society, but on top of that, it is benefiting society and he's making a profit. And there's no reason why that organization, if it was built correctly, meaning it has all of its processes, it has the right people, it has the right system running behind it, why that just couldn't run and exist forever. And so Elephant Learning came about when one of my advisors from college had contacted me basically regarding a National Science Foundation grant, which we never received. And he kind of said, I got these games for children. And we couldn't use the games. We had to rebuild the whole thing because they were in Flash. So, I mean, it's a SaaS thing. It's like Flash was dying and dead. It's like 2016 at this point when we were starting. And I'm like, yeah, there's no way I'm inheriting this as I'm doing this on my own dime. I'm going to be bankrupt, honestly. So we're going to have to rebuild it. But like what it was we were going to sell these games to the schools. And I said, I don't like that business, honestly, because there's so many people trying to sell software to schools that we're never going to get our foot in the door. And on top of that, as far as I understand, this is a good old boys club. I mean, I've been watching John Oliver, and it looked like companies were bribing principals $100 gift cards. I don't got bribe money. And I got no contacts. So here's where we are. That's not a great business to be in. And what he told me was that 4 out of 5 students start kindergarten unprepared for the kindergarten curriculum. And it just so happens completely amongst income lines. So it's the bottom 20% that are the furthest behind. On average, children in the bottom 20% income range is about 3 years behind conceptually on average. And each step goes up with only the top 20% income earners having their students enter kindergarten prepared for the kindergarten curriculum. And I just thought, God, I mean, that's so hard to believe. Like, what does the kindergarten curriculum start with? And he says, counting to 20. So I'm saying, so you're saying that these students can't come in with the ability to count to 10. I'm having a hard time connecting the dots here. And he says, I'm sorry. I said, you can't, I messed this story up. I'm just going to keep going. Anyway, so the difference was what I said, how is this possible? Right. Like the students, so the parents believe that counting to 10 is the students saying the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But what kindergarten defines as counting to 10 is give me 10 things. They slide over 10 things and stop at 10, which are 2 different skills. Like in the example we were talking about a second ago, the student's most likely to keep going if they haven't learned how to do this. And it just so happens that this is what preschool teaches. This is what preschool ensures. And so that's why preschool, that's why like the top 20% income earners are able to have all their children enter prepared, is because most of them are sending their children to preschool. From there, it just turns out, and I mean, this makes complete sense after I say it, right? But the next chart he shows me is a percentile versus income, meaning here's the bottom 25% entering in at the lowest percentile, and then up to the top percentile. And here's where they exit. And the lines were flat, meaning that you basically exited the school system at the same percentile at which you entered, meaning that you came in behind, and it's very likely that you're going to stay behind and exit behind. And the reason why this makes perfect sense is because if you didn't understand the language to understand the teacher in kindergarten, and you're always playing catch up with the language, then you've never really kind of understood what was going on, especially from the perspective of mathematics. And ultimately, if you understand the teacher, then the school system works. But that's always been true, right? Like if you were to find a student or a teacher for your student right now, if you have a child, you're looking for a teacher, you're going to look for the teacher they understand, because well, they're getting it, like it's working. So the end of this story is that 75% of high school students are not proficient in high school mathematics, and 69% of STEM majors switch to a major with less mathematics. So you see those percentages flow all the way from kindergarten all the way up through college. And it's turning out that, these days, because business is so data driven, everything's statistically driven, the business professors are having a hard time getting across the ideas they need to get across because of the inability to do the statistics and the algebra. And so most of those students are also now switching to humanities. So we got an entire generation of children that we told, you can grow up to be anything you want to be because this is America. And they got to college wanting to be STEM majors and business majors and go into high paying jobs. And it turns out that they switch to English major and they come out with their salary capped between 30 and 56,000, I think is the range. And they got student loans. So it's a very challenging thing. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're fine. I was going to say that's an incredible statistics. And I mean, I've seen that firsthand, getting a STEM degree myself. So many people switch. I've seen numerous people switch from computer science to computer information science because, it was less math, it was less coding. I've seen a bunch of people switch from math to education with, concentration in mathematics, whether they wanted to do, like high school math or whatever that is. I've seen a lot of people, switch from bio to whatever other degrees. I haven't seen a lot of people switch out of business. That's interesting. But I've definitely talked to people who are in business calc who had no idea what was going on. And, I looked at their curriculum and it was like the first couple weeks of my regular, math calc course. And I was like, geez. But, I think what you're saying is too true. A lot of people, think they're doing well because of the way the system is set up, but they're really behind or they don't know, really what's going on. But that raises an interesting, question for me, talking about percentages, and I can't help thinking, going back to percent as, this common thing that a lot of people get hung up on. And, a lot of people really good at like simple algebra, multiplication, division, subtraction. But anytime you throw percentages at someone, their brain just stops working. And, even if it's, tipping at a restaurant, I think that's a really good example. People go, what's 20% of X number of dollars? And the way that they're thinking about it is they're like, okay, I'm just going to get my phone out because I give up. And there really aren't that many people out there that can go, okay, what's 10%? 10% is easy. And then I'm going to multiply it by 2. It's really interesting. So what's kind of your experience, with all of this in percentages? Have you gotten into that much with your curriculum, or is that kind of outside of the scope of what you guys are doing?
Well, our curriculum covers through algebra because what we were thinking was like, if we could just get the algebra curriculum out there, we could start to recover some of those students in high school or in university that like maybe we just feel the most common misconceptions. And if we can get them to understand these things, hopefully they can walk in the classroom and speak with the teacher and understand them. And for percentages specifically, I mean, so you got to remember, like, when a student switches over to fractions, now, like, we're using the same language in a different way. And then depending on which teacher you got, right? Like you either caught the switch or you didn't. Most people are not considering mathematics as a language. And so because of that, we don't have the conversations that are necessary to diffuse the student. And right, so like, if you can imagine, like, maybe if you didn't understand coming in, or if you kind of understood but you've always kind of had the experience that you're a little bit behind, well, then you're going to have that anxiety around mathematics. And now we change the nomenclature of how we're writing the numbers, and first of all, that's going to throw them off. And like, the further behind they are, they're going to be thrown off even more, right? And so the conversation that I have with parents that are then transitioning students from fractions to decimals and percentages is we teach that in our system. And what we do is we show them the decimal ratio, we show them the fraction ratio, and we show them the percentage ratio. And we're having them go through and identify it. And sometimes a student doesn't catch on because we have to put them on different screens. Like, oh, here it is as decimal, here it is as percentage. So I asked the parent to just draw out the line, split it up, and show them on one piece of paper, here's where 20% is, here's where 0.2 is, here's where 1/5 is, right? So that they can understand that actually the language is the same. So the language of these things is the language of proportionality is what it is. And all we're doing is we're describing proportionality. And then this is really important, right? Is that no one of these ways is more correct than the other for describing it, right? Because like, then, I mean, when the anxiety set in, and like, we're talking about at least half report math anxiety, and we know 75% are kind of behind. The issue is going to be that they're afraid of being wrong, right? So like, right, oh, well, which is the right one for me to use? The right one for you to use is the one that's going to help you solve the problem right now. And then, I mean, the funny thing about percentages is that it's basically still the decimal system. Right? So, right, because like, and depending on how much precision you want to talk about, I'm looking at CNBC right over there. It says the 2-year yield is 0.181%. So like, I mean, it's better than saying that the yield is 0.00181%, right? I mean, but I mean, it's just the three ways that kind of worldwide we've decided to describe proportionality. And if we can get the student to just overcome that and understand that, then a lot of stuff that goes on with it also tends to start to diffuse.
I love the way that you described, the language of proportionality, because I just visualize math as like the most powerful descriptive language that we have, like, in our arsenal as human beings. Like, I love thinking about math as, it's describing these relationships, these existences, these proportionalities. And I think that's something that, you touching on that in combination with like the language factor, like teaching it as a language, I feel like that's something that I didn't necessarily get in school. I think I got that more from like reading from, very smart experts in the field, people who are very kind of well able to describe it to other people. And I think that that's something that, has been missing for a while in terms of in the school system and stuff. I think it's absolutely fantastic what you guys are doing over there. And I think it's amazing to see. I feel like there's been a renaissance in ed tech in the last 3 to 5 years, and now even more with because of the coronavirus, kind of the forced forced digitization and forced distance interaction. It's been amazing to kind of see these different and unique ways of approaching these education problems. And going back to it, I love the approach of that language, that descriptive approach, in accordance to math, because I feel like that's something that children can much easier kind of relate to and interact with. Is that kind of, what you found? And I guess, how did that originally kind of start? Chris asked, like the foundations of elephant learning and stuff, but I guess what was the original point where you're like, yes, this is the way that we're going to approach this, and this is the way that this is like the best way to teach this?
Well, I mean, again, this came from the latest in early age education research, meaning that these are third-party papers that were peer-reviewed, journal published. The information's already out there. But for me, I think that, like, in my experience, this is actually how they teach mathematics at the graduate level. And I remember when I got to the graduate level of mathematics, I mean, even in undergrad, like when you start doing proofs, it's more written out. And it kind of felt like, well, why didn't you say these things kind of before? And, like a lot of times we're putting students in a situation where there's no way they could succeed. So for example, in algebra, they try to talk about continuous functions just because they can, I guess. But the problem is you can't talk about continuous functions without the idea of the limit. And you don't see the idea of the limit until you get to calculus. So like any description you're going to give a student at that point in time is not going to be precise. And again, like when you're talking about mathematics and what you had just said, the whole language is about precision, right? It's about being actually 100% accurate, 100% truthful, if you will. And so like, really what's actually occurred is we've taken the way that a professor would teach this at the graduate level, and we're just approaching it back at the student's level. And so like from algebra on, it's kind of us, like the research wasn't out there for algebra, but we kind of already know what to do because this is what we do.
That's really interesting. Talking proportions, something that came up for me was the kind of disconnect between, going back to that percentage, the 100% and the minute and the hour. And I think that's something where a lot of kids get hung up is, 100% of an hour is 60. And so, when they're talking about seconds and minutes, kids, from my experience, want to go all the way to 100, 100 seconds in a minute, 100 minutes in an hour. And it's a hard switch for them to kind of pull back to 60. It's really interesting what you were saying, about going into kindergarten, how they ask kids to count 10 toys and slide the 10 toys across the table and stop. And I think that's one of the kind of disconnects as well with time. But what kind of experience do you have with that? And is time part of your curriculum as well?
So we don't try to work on things like that. We work on the essential topics, meaning that if I can get your student to understand the numbers, if I can get them to understand addition and subtraction, they can add and subtract with anything, including money and time and measurements and inches, right? I mean, it's actually, it's not that much harder for them to do that. It's just that if you kind of got issues with the fundamental idea there, then this is adding further confusion.
So it's more about the concept than the actual problem
so
itself.
Think about it this way, right? Like if you or I were to walk into a third year biochem course, the professor would be using 3 years worth of jargon that we had not learned. And we wouldn't really understand what he's saying. We could probably try to pick up and pretend, and like, if they could give us methods, or like, could you just show me like how to do it, right? If you can give me a process on how to do it, I can remember the process. but I'm not really getting it. Right. So the difference between a student that gets it and doesn't get it is kind of that. To connect it with like an experience maybe that everyone's had is like with children. The first thing is whether they can say the word, right? And if they can't say the word, then you're probably not going to understand it. The second thing is if you're saying the word and they can recognize the meaning, right? So like your bus is out in the garage and then they go to the garage and go get the bus. The third is if they can use the word in context correctly, right? Meaning that they say the bus is in the garage and then we go get it or whatever. And that's really kind of what it is, right? Like at the point where you're talking about time, you're now at the third step of the numbers, the addition, the, whatever it is are the base concepts that are going to build up to that. And at that point, like if you didn't have them down here, you definitely don't have them up here.
I have another question for you, a little bit of a transition here. I'd love to learn more about the journey of publicity. I think that's catchy. I think that's a good way to describe it. Tell us, like, I doing some of the research, I saw, NBC on your profile, and then there was a couple others as well. Like, tell us a little bit about like the journey from like where it started to where it's at now, and kind of like what that's been like for you and Elephant Learning.
Okay, so you're looking for just kind of the story of how we grew.
Exactly. Because like we've talked about, the inspiration, the early stages, a little bit of like, the curriculum itself, etc. But I'm very intrigued to see like what's the actual, how did it scale? How did it grow to where it's at today? I'd love to learn kind of that connecting piece there.
It's mainly a lot of Facebook is what it is. We're looking into other channels, but I mean, basically what we knew is if we could deliver the results, that at the very least, we're going to have people talking about us. And so then it's been also a lot of branding. So like at first we started as math games, like you heard, math games didn't end up cutting it. Now we're a math academy, right? So it's a online math academy. This is serious stuff. This isn't trying to be a game, though you can think of it like a puzzle game, like Angry Birds, but for mathematics. And then like we did have like a connect to get onto 9 News through the University of Denver. They loved the story, so they put us on. We got them to be able to follow up with a testimonial, and in that piece, we had a kindergartner who was we had a two-year-old who just turned 3 for the interview. We had a 3-year-old that was doing kindergarten math and almost first grade because she was already starting to work on skip counting. And so like for that customer, because at that time, I think we only covered up to multiplication division. So for that time, for that customer, that was what they needed to see. And so through Facebook advertising, we were able to bring people in and add the credibility and get them to come in and use it and see success, which drives testimonial, which drives references, which drives everything else. So it's actually the wheel of the game as we built it working. So the game was to empower children with mathematics, right? So that good in the world that we're trying to add, like taking the plastic out of the ocean, the good that we're trying to add is the empowering the children with mathematics. And we figured out, right, like how do we build the game so that as we do that, it becomes perpetual.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, I think that's brilliant. Yeah, props to you for doing that. I guess my next question too, just kind of one after the other here, is where can people like find you and your organization? I know you mentioned Facebook. Like, is there like a website? Is there like a course, a curriculum? Like, where can people find you if they're interested in they're listening in on this?
Sure. elephantlearning.com. Just go there or Google Elephant Learning and you'll find us. And you can get started there. And then you just sign in via whatever device you'd like.
Perfect. Simple enough. I like that.
Yeah. My question for you is, where you are right now, what do you see the next steps are, and how are you looking to scale this further and grow? Like, kind of what's your future plan?
Well, so our goal is to cover through calculus so that we can get a university student who wants to be STEM and catch them right up to understanding the professor. That would be the goal. I also want to add coding because, to be honest with you, I think it's natural with the algebra curriculum to start discussing that. And I also think that it becomes one of these skills where, like, they've been saying for 20 years that they're going to find a way to get computers to be able to interact with humans better. But if you want the power of the silicon, right, you have to be able to speak the language that it speaks. And the thing that we could do now to maybe empower our species more is to have all of our scientists have that at their disposal as a second language, as like if they could know it as well as the computer scientist knows it, right? Then that's that. And to be honest with you, computer science is just speaking the language, right? Like if you've put out 200 projects, then you've put out 200 projects, right? Like you've had that experience, you've done it. The more you code, the more you learn to code. So the idea kind of was we would teach them algebra, and then we could use the algebra to get them to understand the rest.
Awesome. Yeah. Do you see, I know you initially mentioned you kind of wanted to stray away from selling the software to schools. Do you see, as it gets more popular, that becoming an option? Or you want to stay separated as your own entity?
Well, I'm happy to work with schools, though I think the issue still tends to be the same, right? Like we have a product that could go into a classroom, and what we're going to do is we're just going to give it to the teacher for free. And then basically what we're going to do is ask the teacher to ask the parent to sign up, right? So maybe we give all the children the placement exam for free. So now the teacher knows where they are. So it's a great tool for the teacher. And then at the same time, right? And this tends to actually be one of the major issues, which is that when I've spoken with teachers about using technology in the classroom, so like we did try to investigate this, they seem to say that they had issues with getting the parent buy-in, meaning that the student might be sent home with an iPad, but they may not do the work. And so like by having a financial commitment from the parent, even if it's a very, very small one, right? So even if we say, oh, well, the scholarship is such that it's even $5 a month, right? But because they're buying in, they will get the student to do it. And so like, as we're moving forward into the fall here, where we don't know if students will be back in the classroom or not, I mean, it's really important for us at the very least to be able to at least just get that 30-minute per week buy-in, because we can do so much good with it.
Yeah, that goes back to the principle of, really appreciating what you pay for. And if something's free, you don't appreciate it as much. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's awesome. Yeah, I know my wife is really gonna love listening to this episode. She's early childhood education and special ed. So that's what she got a dual degree there. And we're expecting in August. So definitely looking into, starting to look into those platforms that we can use as well. So really looking forward to, seeing how we can use Elephant Learning with our own little one.
Sure. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So I know we're getting close to time. Mike and Chris, you guys have any, kind of last questions? And yeah.
Yeah, my last question is, I know you kind of alluded to it earlier, but I would just kind of love a little bit of like a bullet point list, right? Of what are the tips and tricks that you recommend for a parent who has a child that might be struggling, for our listeners who are, trying to figure out maybe like the next step for them. Like, what's the next step? What do you recommend?
Well, so, I mean, I'd go to our website and get the placement exam typically the student completes the placement exam within the first 3 days. And the first 3 days is also the trial period, meaning that if you don't like it within the first 3 days, you just go ahead and cancel and it won't charge you. But we'd be able to tell them very precisely, we'd be able to give them something that even they could take to their teacher to show them. I'd say the report's probably easily worth over $100. I mean, the Kumon report or the Mathnasium report, or they're not going to be as precise and as detailed as what we're giving out. So I think if that was the first step, that would be helpful. If that is not something that a parent is willing to do, then, I mean, the first step is determining if there's a problem, right? So if there's anxiety, then you know it. If there's issues with the word problems, you know it. If you haven't tried to do that, then, I mean, try, right? Like, just find out what's at their level and try to find where in life you can kind of exhibit that and pose it as an actual problem to see if they apply the concept to solve it. If they do, you're probably golden, right? And if they don't, then that's when, right, like, it's going to be helpful to have that assessment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
My last question, a little bit more on the personal side. What originally got you into software and developing these kind of products? And then honestly, I'd love to also hear about what got you into academia. What made you go and get that doctorate as well?
Yeah, sure. So I started coding, I guess, in the 8th grade. It was like we had taken all the computer classes they had, and like there was these old Apple II GSs in another room, and I guess the teacher gave me this book and said, well, here you go. And I was kind of by myself for like a week or two. It was kind of weird. And then the next thing I got moved to another lab where it was like some other kind of Apple's stuff, right? Basic. And they put in like 4 or 5 people. It was like, I guess they're all friends of mine. I might have to recruit them. I don't even remember, but like all of a sudden then there was people and we were learning basic. And so when I turned 14, I thought to myself, well, why don't I teach myself C++? So I got this book. It was the Borland compiler, and it had a CD in the back, and I popped the CD in, and it was basically like it was like going through the book, but the exercises that would be like at the back of the chapter were happening during the chapter. So like put the text out and it would say, this is how you're going to put a print on the screen. You go ahead and try it, right? And then it checks it and it's like, yeah, you did it. So this is how I learned to code. And then after you learn how to code, you got to actually code. So then you got to have projects. So I thought, what I'll do is I'll go get me a book on neural networks and video game programming. Cause I thought, oh yeah, that's like what I'm going to do. And so there was like this video game book, and it was talking about like this hardware hack. And I mean, like, maybe I understood. I don't even know. I understand now, right? But like, I remember like it didn't even really matter because it was kind of copy paste, right? Like this weird hack to get onto the screen on a Windows. Like you put in some weird hex code, and all of a sudden you got like the buffer for the screen, and you can manipulate it. And like this thing was basically how to program a game like Wolfenstein. And on the other side, it was like neural networks. And I mean, I got what I needed to from the books. Like it was linear algebra, it was matrixy transformations, it was that stuff. So I was like, okay, well, let's pop in the CD and compile the files and let's see if we can make it run on something. Throw some lottery numbers in there or something. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I got started. So when I got to DU, I basically went straight into data structures and algorithms, which would be a sophomore year class, because I had done probably what would be the C++ course and then more. And that's kind of how I got into it. And then I graduated and I got a job at Dish Network, and And at the same time, I was applying to go to Brown because I wanted to do computer graphics, and I didn't get in because one of my professors had not sent in the recommendation letter, and so then basically I got fast tracked for a TA position at DU because they went back and they made a pull for it. And but like I was the lowest on the totem pole, and so like a year later they said to me, oh well, we're gonna have to take the TA away. And what happened was I was always on math courses for the first year, meaning that they basically told me, you're never going to TA a computer science course because you got a bachelor's in mathematics and computer science, right? So it was like the dual major. But because you have that math component, you're kind of always going to be teaching the calculus stuff, so that we don't have like the other guy who doesn't have the math major teaching the calculus stuff. And so I went up to the math department, who had all the TAs anyway, and I said, hey guys, I can't come to school here next year, but it was cool hanging out. And they said, well, why aren't you going to school here? And I was like, well, I don't got the TA anymore. And they said, oh, well, we can fix that. So so the next thing I know is now I've got a focus in mathematics, and I'm in the PhD program. But it was a joint degree, math, computer science. And I mean, it was a good gig. I'd wake up at like 11 if I could. Sometimes there was like a 9 a.m. course that I'd have to TA, or an 8 a.m. course, something early. I remember it was horrible. But I'd go to sleep afterwards again. Anyway, I'd get in at about 11, and then I'd go get lunch, and then I'd stare at a problem until like I fall asleep. And then I wake up and I do it again. And then like I just keep repeating that until I got to the solution. And then finally I graduated one day.
So what I'm hearing is you got an accidental PhD. You kind of just happened to be in the right place at the right time and keep going.
I think things happen.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah. Mike here eventually wants to get a PhD in economics. Specifically, I don't want to take words out of your mouth, but Mike, if you want to explain exactly what you're wanting to do.
Yeah, throw Mike under the bus. We like doing that. We always.
Yeah, I try to do it at least once an episode.
Exactly, same. So thank you for doing that, John Michael. Go ahead, Mike.
I really want to get a PhD in specifically in behavioral economics, because I love kind of the marriage of psychology and economics, and the human decision making, and the entire component of why people make the decisions they do, and how does that affect everything in broad sweeps. And I love that the implementation of math into that too, of plenty of classic word problems. Like I love Kahneman and Tversky's work on heuristics, and if you say a certain probability for someone, even a statistician will get the question wrong, and all sorts of amazing kind of effects. And I love how that human interaction can tie into more esoteric things like math that people struggle with, but when you start implementing them the ways that you are, I think it just makes a lot more sense, and it works for a lot of more people. So I think I think it's a great initiative.
Yeah, looking forward to looking more into the program, seeing if we can use it, and that's awesome. Yeah, but Aditya, do you have any last comments for our audience? Do you have any last questions for us?
Can't think of anything. I appreciate your time. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we just want to thank you for coming on the show. It's been great. Looking forward to hearing some feedback from our listeners on what they think of your platform. Hopefully, you get a couple clients from it. I know definitely several people that I'm going to call right after this and say, hey, better get your kids on this because it's going to help them out a lot. So, yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. For everybody listening, definitely go talk to, but also check out Dr. Nagrath on LinkedIn. We'll also drop, all of your links, the website, and social you want, the podcast as well, so people can, find Elephant Learning and check your stuff out. So thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. For everybody listening, until next time.